Muchísimas gracias por la introducción. Vamos a continuar en inglés. I know it's a bit challenging before lunch. Bear with us. The agenda has been really full, but I think it's really a very interesting panel. It's a pleasure to be here with you again today to talk about the importance of marine ecosystems, not only for our small island countries, the SIDS, but for all the countries that have coastal marine areas in Latin America. So, however, we know very little about the management of this type of ecosystem and the goals that have been established at the COP15 on biodiversity. And we know that they are quite ambitious. So in this panel, we want to touch a bit upon what is the importance of aligning to the global biodiversity framework and what are the countries doing at the moment to achieve these goals. So first, let me introduce the panel. We have three members. The first is from Belize, Leandra. Cho-Ricketts is the Executive Director of the Belize Fund for a Sustainable Future. She holds a PhD in marine ecology with over 15 years of experience in marine conservation in Belize. And as of August 2022, she leads the startup of this new fund, including the establishment of operational policies and safeguards, fund management, and development of grant-making programs, all aligned with the conservation commitments of the Belize Blue Bond Loan Agreement. The fund was actually established to manage the funds on behalf of the Belize government as part of the Blue Bond Debt for Nature swap that Belize has successfully been able to achieve. Leandra. Thank you so much. Anywhere. So next up from St. Lucia is Greg Henry. Greg joined the St. Lucia National Conservation Fund in 2020 as program officer, responsible for the grant-making program. In July 2021, Greg was appointed the executive director of the St. Lucia National Conservation Fund with the goal of providing sustainable funding to support the conservation, restoration, and effective management of St. Lucia biodiversity and natural resources. The St. Lucia National Conservation Trust Fund is one of the partner conservation trust funds of the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund since 2017. And over the years, the fund from St. Lucia has developed a diverse range of financing arrangements with a range of partners to support the biodiversity goals for St. Lucia. So welcome, Greg. Where's Greg? Thank you so much. And finally, I want to introduce our panel member from Peru, Pedro Solano. Pedro has more than 30 years of experience in environmental issues, including environmental law and policy, natural protected areas, private and communal conservation, ecotourism, biodiversity, and climate change. Pedro has contributed to the design of the legal framework for natural protected areas in Peru. For 31 years, he led different initiatives in the Peruvian Society of Environmental Law and is a member of the World Commission on Natural Protected Areas and the IUCN World Commission on Environmental Law. He has published numerous books on environmental issues, including natural protected areas and regional conservation in Loreto, in collaboration with the Wildlife Conservation Society and the Peruvian Society of Environmental Law. He has launched the Pact for the Amazon and Healthy Forest with the Interfaith Rainforest Initiative. Thank you, Pedro, for joining us. All right. Thank you so much for our panelists. Without further ado, I already introduced the topic, so we're going to look into the Global Biodiversity Framework, not only on the marine ecosystems, but also the protected areas and all the goals that the countries have committed to by 30 and 30. So let's start off with Leandra. You have a mic? Yeah, the mic is there. All right. So we want to know from Leandra how the RedLAC platform can leverage the Global Biodiversity Framework to scale progress on marine protected areas management. So Leandra, floor is yours.
So just to give a little context and background to that, the vision of the Global Biodiversity Framework is that of a world living in harmony with nature, and this is expected to be in place by 2050. So it's a very tall order, and the idea is that by 2050, biodiversity will be valued, conserved, restored, and wisely used. And leading up to 2050, we have a more immediate target, that of 2030. And this is what I've been hearing a lot about. We heard about it a little earlier, 30 by 30 targets. And the main strategies for achieving this 30 by 30 target for ocean areas, which is kind of the focus of this panel, is looking at how we can scale up marine protected areas towards that target. And so that the main strategy there is through the establishment of marine protected areas. The idea, as you all may know, is to have at least 30% of coastal and marine areas effectively conserved and managed. So not just paper parks, but places that are counted as effectively managed through ecologically representative, well-connected, and equitably governed systems of protected areas. So this means we must also be including especially our communities, local communities, indigenous peoples, because those are often the people that are directly dependent on these areas. So how can RedLAC assist in upscaling these MPAs to help us, this region, achieve the 30 by 30 target? Well, I think, RedLAC is well aligned to do this as a network of, 27 funds, conservation trust funds. And they have been collectively investing significant support already to biodiversity conservation and sustainable development in the region. So RedLAC is in a unique position to leverage now this GBF platform through the targets of the 30 by 30 to help countries within Latin America, within the Caribbean, upscale to meet that target. And this, the idea I'd like to share is that this can be done through a regional MPA initiative that provides support to the countries of the region to achieve that target. And we have some existing examples to build upon, so I would like to refer to the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund. They are already working at a network level within the Caribbean, and that fund, through the CBF, they're funding the development of marine protected areas across the various Caribbean countries, and it's a well-established network of collaboration. So it's easy enough for that to be upscaled across the entire region. We're also, the idea is sharing knowledge, lessons learned, best practices across the region with each other, of course, as we're doing here this week, but also with key multilateral and international donors, because financing marine protected areas is very expensive, as a lot of you may know already, and certainly in Belize we're very aware of that. And so having a coordinated approach through these networks where we can leverage not just the knowledge, but financing as a regional unit or a hub in accessing. We heard yesterday the GF president, it was, and CEO talked about committing more funding for biodiversity. So being able to strategically coordinate and develop this coordinated approach focused on upscaling marine protection. Critical to this, of course, is RedLAC's ability to engage and bring in and leverage the inclusion of your local communities and indigenous peoples, and I know there's a whole section on that tomorrow, so the RedLAC recognizes the importance of that, so it's to continue building up on that as we work to have successful upscaling of our marine protected areas. And finally, I think the members can help leverage their funded programs to incentivize governments and countries to get on board with the GBF target of the 30 by 30, so that across this region, Latin America and the Caribbean, we can be successful in achieving our 30 by 30 targets. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Leandra. So after the question, I have one question for each panel member. I want to keep you guys engaged also in the audience. I would like to open up the floor. So I'm looking also to the organizers to support with a microphone. So please have your question or comment ready. So after Pedro, I will open up the floor for the audience for any comments, questions for panels, but also just in general, if you have any remark. So going over to Greg.
Thank you.
All right, Greg has a microphone that works. Thank you so much. Greg, can you tell us a little bit about your experience in St. Lucia on capacity constraints to progress on marine conservation at the national level? And looking forward then to the global biodiversity framework. Thank you.
Correct. Thank you very much, Tanya, and it's my pleasure to be here, representing not only St. Lucia, but the Caribbean region. As small island developing states, we have to tell you the importance and the magnitude of the issue with regards to marine conservation. I would like to say and implore to you that the marine environment and ecosystem represents a significant component of our way of life, our economy, local community development, nutrition, and so on and so forth. So marine conservation is an imperative. And of course, working towards the biodiversity targets, marine biodiversity targets, requires us to orient ourselves and position ourselves in areas that we have had significant difficulties, and I will specify. So whereas I think, and I would understand, observe that many of my predecessors or speakers have spoken about a governance framework for marine protected areas, this is quite apparent in the region, and it's in Lucia, where you have marine spatial planning processes, you have protected areas, management plans. These are often weak, and of course, they need to be properly aligned with national developmental plans. Sometimes you find that these are at odds, and therefore, the targets that have been set on the management plans never find fulfillment, and they are not prioritized on the national agenda. So first off, therefore, we have to become better at mainstreaming our marine development or conservation plans with national developmental plans. Then we're talking about funding. Everybody talks about funding. The important issue is that funding must be channeled in an effective way so that you can get an effective conservation, marine conservation program or profile or protocols. And I must say that funding is available. However, how we use those funds depends on our technical capacity to implement programs that are effective. So when we speak of marine spatial planning, this is not something that we are used to. We often have to hire consultants, which can be very expensive to do and takes a while. And by the time you have completed a marine spatial plan, probably 2 years or 3 years would have passed, because again, these need to be mainstreamed or somehow passed through some kind of legislation that can be adopted as national policy. And therefore, having had a marine spatial plan in place, it somehow becomes outdated because other processes would have taken over. You would know that we are heavily dependent on tourism. So for instance, you may have found that a very large developer would have come and offered some grand purpose of development for a particular space that includes some critical marine ecosystems that does not necessarily take into consideration or align with our marine conservation goals. So that is a very significant issue that we face. One of the other points that I would like to make, and which is representative across the region, is that we have not found it effective enough to have a harmonized approach to our own marine conservation policies in the region. Despite the fact that we are very insular and very close to each other proximally and geographically, there is often the need to safeguard physical and sovereignty and political boundaries that sometimes acts as a barrier to having a more harmonized approach to our marine conservation goals. And so we have to become better at articulating our own conservation priorities, harmonizing those across the region, so that having harmonized, then there is a greater ability to pool resources and efforts to bring in some sort of structure and better effective governance, and therefore moving towards, collectively moving towards these conservation priorities. And so I would like to end by saying that there are efforts towards establishing that a more harmonized approach. And of course, this requires a more solid effort that the conservation funds, the Caribbean Biodiversity Funds, and other agencies are involved in. Let me close by saying that I would want us to pay attention to how we measure impact. Having attracted millions of dollars is not an indicator of impact of interventions. We often mistake that. What the impact, we have to decide for us, what are the indicators of success for marine conservation in the region? And that is something that I think all of us should keep at the back of our minds when we set our targets, when we enter into conversations with donors, what are the expectations across both parties, and what are, like I mentioned earlier, how we speak to each other in the region in terms of having a harmonized approach. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Greg. Very interesting indeed. So we go over to Pedro. Pedro, if you can elaborate on key next steps that RedLAC, again, we would like to see how RedLAC can play a role in all of this, can take to advance, again, national action on marine conservation towards 2030.
Gracias, Tania. La respuesta corta a qué es lo que puede hacer RedLAC es obviamente seguir canalizando fondos, generando capacidades y habilitando plataformas de monitoreo para la efectividad. Y es algo que ya se viene haciendo y que creo que se viene haciendo bien. Pero la respuesta larga es un poquito más compleja, ¿no? O sea, porque la verdad que el esquema de simplemente canalizar fondos, hacer que los proyectos tengan un buen diseño, una buena ejecución y que tengan un monitoreo, me parece que ya no es suficiente para el momento que vivimos, ¿no? Entonces, creo que la agenda internacional actual, con las metas 30 por 30, con las ODS, con las NDC, etcétera, 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 es una oportunidad muy buena de generar una mejor narrativa para lo que queremos lograr. Y me parece que esa narrativa todavía no la estamos construyendo de una manera adecuada. Y ahí creo que RedLAC tiene un momento o tiene un rol importante para que mediante una mejor narrativa de lo que estamos viviendo como comunidad planetaria y lo que se requiere hacer, pueda generar una mejor sensación de momentum a los actores clave. Y los actores clave siempre van a ser los gobiernos, siempre van a ser las grandes empresas, siempre van a ser los grupos con capacidad de algún modo incidir en opinión pública. Entonces, creo que todavía esos grandes grupos no tienen un sentido de urgencia, ni tienen un sentido de que estamos en esa sensación de que juntos podríamos empujar algo mejor. Y creo que RedLAC puede tener un rol para eso. Porque a lo que me refiero con esa mejor narrativa es que la narrativa tendría que estar asociada a una visión común. Y creo que esa visión común es algo que simplemente no compartimos, no tenemos. Probablemente ya estamos logrando la visión común del mundo ambientalista con los, digamos, actores económicos, financieros del ambientalismo, pero no lo estamos logrando con los demás. Y mientras no lo logremos con los demás, vamos a seguir metidos en una cápsula ambientalista. Entonces, la visión común tiene que ver con qué queremos todos, cómo nos articulamos y cómo nos sentimos que somos parte de una misma comunidad, ¿no? Que no sea un ellos versus nosotros, como viendo siendo nuestra historia desde hace 40, 50 años, ¿no? O sea, cómo hay un más nosotros que ese enfrentamiento. Y creo, obviamente, que ahí, por lo menos en el lado de los que venimos conversando de estos temas por tanto tiempo, que es sociedad civil, gobiernos, comunidades indígenas, la parte de ciencia, hay que comenzar a generar más. A mí me da gusto que RedLAC sea un espacio que incorpore tanto al sector empresarial, por ejemplo, y hay grupos empresariales de distinto tipo que están sintonizando con esta nueva narrativa porque han entendido de que lo que estamos hablando es una narrativa por la competitividad también. O sea, el mundo actual, el mundo de ahora y el mundo del mañana va a requerir una competitividad asociada al tema de cambio climático, al tema de resiliencia, al tema de economía circular, etc. Entonces, esa es una narrativa en que creo que podemos construir una visión común, ¿no? Para eso también, ¿cómo puede ayudar RedLAC o qué podría hacer RedLAC? Creo que hay que acercar mucho más la ciencia, los números, los indicadores a los tomadores de decisión. Creo que todavía nuestros números, a pesar de ser muy buenos, todavía son pocos, ¿no? O sea, en la jornada de hoy hemos estado viendo cómo desde el BID, desde las empresas, desde distintos grupos se está trabajando en este tema de indicadores, pero para serles franco, los números que yo vi, yo esperaba tener mucha más claridad de números en varias cosas, ¿no? Y creo que simplemente lo que pasa es que es complicado acceder todavía a algunos indicadores que nos digan qué es lo que estamos haciendo y cómo es que realmente ese nuevo paradigma de competitividad del que estamos hablando tanto se está reflejando en bienestar humano, se está reflejando en ecosistemas saludables, se está generando en la resiliencia. Y para ello, obviamente hay que seguir apostando por construir confianza, ¿no? Entonces, en todos estos años que vengo trabajando en el tema, a veces se siente que los talleres, los encuentros no son tan importantes, que son temas de proceso y que más importante es el proyecto. Yo creo que son importantes ambos, porque de verdad que encontrarnos ayuda a que sepamos quién es la cara, el rostro y la voz detrás de algo que se escribió o un proyecto que se aprobó. Y esas reuniones que tenemos allá afuera en la placita con el pisco sour o el café ayudan muchísimo a construir confianza y necesitamos mejorar la confianza entre actores distintos. Ese es un tema clave. Y yéndome, para finalizar, Tania, ya al tema marino en sí, el tema marino tiene un potencial enorme y tiene una necesidad muy grande. Y sin embargo, todavía nos marca una distancia muy grande entre lo que hacemos. O sea, si carecemos de información y de articulación y de entendimiento aún para temas de voz que estamos trabajando desde hace tantísimos años, en la parte marina es mucho más compleja, todavía con esta parte pues territorial, extraterritorial y todo lo que ello implica, ¿no? Entonces creo que ahí también hay que buscar la forma de articularnos con estos espacios que vienen surgiendo de la biodiversidad más allá de las jurisdicciones y ver cómo impactamos ahí en generar también mecanismos de articulación para poder impulsar eso. En el tema de conservación marina en el Perú nos resulta siempre muy complejo establecer y gestionar espacios para áreas protegidas. En el Perú tenemos actualmente solo una área protegida marina que es 100% marina y que pese a todo el gran esfuerzo que significó establecerla, todavía tiene complejidades sobre cómo fue establecida, cómo se gestionará, etcétera, y ahora estamos empujando una nueva área. Entonces, eso de ahí creo que es una necesidad muy grande. Muchas gracias.
Sí, muchas gracias, Pedro, por esas palabras. Unfortunately, I wanted to open the floor, but I just got some, whispering that we will continue the informal, networking during lunch, pisco sours, and everything else after this, because we're now in between lunch and the next session that already starts at 3 p.m. So I want to thank all of the panel members. I want to invite everyone to please, you know who they are now. Please reach out to the CBF, and thank you so much for everything, and have a great lunch. Buen apetito.